Hello and welcome to Set 6 PBE Tournament, Game 1.
Top 8 of the TFT Gizmos and Gadgets PBE Clash as we hop on board with Team Liquid's Grand Vice 8 to start things off. Now, as Mortdog was saying in the very beginning of the pre-show, we have a new patch upon our hands, and I wonder how Day 1 strategies will formulate compared to Day 2. So I toss it immediately back to Mortdog and ask, is there anything that you kind of noticed was a trend that was developing from the first day of competition to kind of like how people have been streaming and playing or even thinking about the patch since?
Yeah, I think it took a little bit, but we've seen sort of a quick, a focus on the late game power. And there's a couple different ways you can play that late game power from what we've seen. We've seen sort of the Orianna and Janna to support whatever carry you can get, like, say, a Jhin. That's proven to be very powerful. There's also the Fiora and Yona pair. If you can get the right items on especially Fiora, Fiora can just output a ton of damage. And then there's just the, can you get like a Jinx or a Jace, actually. I think Jace in particular has risen up over the course of the last 24 hours as a champion that people really understand like how much damage this guy can output.
Yep, that's totally true. Here we go. The 1-4 augments immediately getting introduced with some interesting choices. Duet for social light synergy, snipers, as well as the weak spot here. More. Oh, wow. Immediately picks a duet. I was thinking about something a little bit more generic, and Grand Vice says, hey, I don't have a socialite right now, but when I do, it is going to be glorious. Still looking for his +1 and picks up that duet synergy.
Yeah, this is an interesting choice, and I like this choice because all it takes is one socialite, whether it be a Taric or a more popular Seraphine, and you'll be able to now have two champions get that plus 20% damage. Further, if you want to invest even more, but for something like we talked about, like that Fiora and Yone comp, that can be really good to amp up both your carries. And we've seen a lot of this throughout the tournament, that people are be willing to itemize two carries, because front lines haven't been as stable as I think they were in Reckoning. And so using those two carries to kind of blow through a second spotlight could be a lot of extra power.
It's true. You know, a lot of people think about just how the carries... Oh, speaking of frontline, we do have a 2-star Blitzcrank very early on and have the ability to even capitalize on the scrap. I do wonder how Grand Vice will utilize this extra component here. But yeah, the front line is something that I think people are still figuring out, and how to build a very tanky, amount of sustain throughout the entire fight. A lot of people are focusing on the damage amplification, how they get all these big explosions on. But as you mentioned, frontline is going to be really crucial. Now, some players are also favoring heavy economic-based strategies. This Yordle helps you pop out Yordle every single round, and he's going to try to manipulate those odds by trying to use this early Zephyr. Now, I wonder if he got the Zephyr off the item grab bag or he got the Shojin. Either way, good utility to start off for Cheetah.
Yeah, for sure. I think he got the Zephyr off the item grab bag, and that's, going to be good here. And he's got the Reforger to use later if he needs. But Zephyr early actually can do a pretty good amount, buying you that extra time in some of these slower-paced combats. And so that, in addition to, as you mentioned, 3 Yordles, he now generates a Poppy, gets a free 2-star Poppy out of that. That feels pretty good. And so, yeah, really good start here for Chi-Tu.
Yeah, that's right. I think people think of Yordles as something like very all or nothing. Like, are you playing Yordles? Well, then you have to collect all the Yordles. And it's not necessarily the case. You can totally just play Yordles as a way to generate some income and economy while playing these very cute champions and also feel like you're not necessarily just bleeding a ton of HP because he's 2-starring the Poppy, he's killing a couple of units. And even if he loses, he still has the ability to put together some good amount of gold. So I like where Chi-Chu's head's at, and just, being able to play what he's given, the high tempo through having multiple champions on the board. It's a little bit over level, utilizing the Zephyr. So yes, he does lose, but not the end of the world. Now, I do want to say that it looks like Soju's at level 5 because he got a gold facing augment. What does he have here?
So he's got Hyper Roll. This is a very popular augment. This is one that I think is borderline, might be a little too strong, but basically as long as you have less than 10 gold, you'll get an additional 3 gold. And so it kind of is like you're at 40 gold for the rest of the game. Allows you to kind of play very aggressively. You can use that extra gold to level up quickly, as Soju did there. You can use it for some roll downs. But I will say I have seen a lot of players get baited by this augment, and sort of when they hit the end game, they're not really sure what to do with it. But I think Soju has shown that he can play that really well, so we'll see how he uses it. But again, very powerful augment for Soju there.
Totally. There's been strategies where you just basically don't roll, and some people that say, you know what, I get all the gold I can roll so I can get my one cost online, and that's where things like the academic protectors might kick in. But we'll go ahead and check in with Soju in a little bit. From now, hopping on board with Torek, who's utilizing his scrap clockwork, high tempo, early game synergies to be able to get a lot of presence and stats onto that board, especially when you get a free Infinity Edge for completing that component off scrap. You can show why that synergy is really powerful in the early game.
Yeah, for sure. And he also had Exile there, which, as you see, is as long as they have no neighbors, they gain an even bigger shield. So between that and Scrap, that's a lot of effective health in the early game. Combine that with the early Camille, who has clearly risen as sort of the premier one-cost frontline right now. She has very high base stats, gives herself a shield when she casts, and can heal when she autos while that shield is up. So very good tank. All of that combined for what is looking like a very strong frontline. If he can just 2-star this Ezreal, that might get him, very deep into the late game.
Yeah, all right. So for Torek's perspective here, just thinking about how he want to utilize his Warmogs, if he's just going to place it on the Camille, he is. I think this just goes to show you the versatility of what you described, and has a lot of open-endedness, right? You talk about how people are still cementing the front line, but they've figured out that items, at least, item-wise, right now, Warmog seems very powerful. There's a lot of ways you can scale the Warmogs through really powerful traits like Chemtech that gives you that percentage HP healing. So the more health you have on a champion, especially in your front, the more value you're going to get off of things like Warmogs. And we do know that some units, even like Galio, scale into the late game with a ton of health that can boost his CC time. So there's a lot of really good stuff here coming up from Torek that I love how open-ended. And he's still a pretty powerful board, even if Soju's at level 6, ready to crush. Just look at the effect of Hyper Roll. Torek reading is like, well, he has so much more gold than me. He's at level 6.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think Soju playing the augment well and shows you how well it can be in the early game, but he'll never be able to have quite the economy that some other players will have in the late game, so he really does need to take that, play it like Hyper Roll, push the advantage, and make sure that he can stay ahead of the curve, because end game, it could backfire a little bit, but yeah, like I said, right now considered one of the pretty powerful augments, and so despite that strong board, that strong Camille, you just can't stand up to that level 6 comp, especially with the Twitch in your backline. Twitch has been another champion that I think has surprisingly done a lot of damage, even without Assassin. Just jumps back there, does a lot of damage. Your targets are kind of stuck on their front line because you don't really have a ton of burst at this point, and so that Twitch just gets to unload. And we see it here again. Look at that Twitch damage.
Yeah, that Twitch is really good at holding the items and also just getting to the backline, immediately deleting all the damage on Sato's side, and that's definitely going to be a nasty loss, but it's okay because it just showcases the fact that he was already losing and inconsistent. The win-loss dynamic isn't great for Sato, so yeah, we'll see if whether or not the Yordle synergy can give him some extra gold, maybe pop out a couple of Vexes. But taking a look at how the lobby is shaping up, the two North American players, Grant Vice and Soju, were streaking, but only Soju is the one that's continually to streak on the opposite end of things. Day6 has 66 health. He's going to be a player that I am curious to see how he turns things around. Is he playing something that can benefit from losing, like Mercenaries, which is reminiscent of Fortune and from the Fate set, and see if maybe snapping that losing streak can be quite the dramatic turnaround for him?
Yeah, Mercenary has been something that we didn't see a lot of in the tournament. We saw it, I think, maybe once or twice. Now, when it worked, it really paid off. Because, again, if you get that big loss streak and then cash out, you can come out with a lot of rewards. But it's very, very risky, and I think a lot of these players in a tournament setting aren't going to be, very prone to take those kind of big risks, so we'll have to see. But yeah, very curious what Day6 board is right now. 66 is definitely one of the lower we've seen at going into Krugs, so very curious what he's playing right now.
Let's go ahead and check it out. He is having a couple of Mercenaries on the board, but he's not fully invested because he hasn't found Misfortune or Quinn, and of course, not Tom Kench, at least not yet. Looking at his items, he's thinking about some combinations, and he's got a lot of repetitive items. He has 2 vests, 2 tiers, equivalent of 2 swords. What an unusual mixture of components here.
Yeah, for sure. So Day6 right now looks like he invested early in the Gangplank. Gangplank, every time he gets a kill with his ability, he can give you extra gold, which can be really powerful. And Day6's been one of the few players who's kind of been a believer that this champion might be insanely strong. But overall, haven't seen much success with this champion because especially at 1-star, his base AD is very low, which means his spell does not do that much damage. And I'm curious if this is kind of backfiring on him, this belief in the Gangplank. But maybe if he gets Gangplank 2, he can turn this around. And you see here, he didn't generate any extra gold. Still on that loss streak, now below 60 health.
Right, so it comes down to a very pivotal moment here in a round. Found Misfortune finally. So he can play the 3 Mercenary, but after he's already lost 42 hit points, he's going to roll to see what he can hit. Wow, immediately hits an Urgot. Can go 1-to-1, replacing Twin Shot. And having Urgot instead say hold the Infinity Edge, we had to break up his Mercenary. So instead, he's just going to replace the Cogwall and give up on the Sniper synergy for the Misfortune. And it can start to build around this Chemtech. So Dasik has direction. Is this a big enough injection of power to snap his losing streak? Or perhaps he will bide even more time and wait for the augment on 3-3?
Yeah, I'll be honest. At this point, I think I'm a little more scared. I put in the Lissandra, I put in the Urgot, get rid of the Gangplank, put the Infinity Edge on the Urgot so that we've got, 3 Chemtech, 2 Twin Shot going. But he's going to go ahead and run this Mercenary for a little bit, see if he can get a few losses. Interestingly enough, wins the round. And Windstreak Mercenary is not as good as old Windstreak Fortune. Windstreak Fortune used to give, 2 to 3 gold. Mercenary only gives around 1 gold. He did get that extra gold with Gangplank, but here we go. We see our augment. And gold reserves is a crazy one that I think a lot of people haven't considered, but giving your mercenaries plus 60% damage can be pretty wild. But I think we'll see him take the Sunfire board as the sort of safe generic out here.
I haven't actually seen the gold reserves in action before, so that was a new one for me, Mort. Cool. I'm discovering some of these augments as well.
So I have to tell a development story on that one. We created that augment, and you'll notice it has a limit. The reason it has a limit is there was a particular playtest where I was running early Mercenary, got a Gangplank, and managed to get up 120 gold with that augment.
What?
And so between Misfortune and Gangplank, I was re-rolling them and had 120 gold and managed to just, delete everything. And it was like, I don't know that this is okay. And so we had to give it a limit.
What do you mean? 120% damage amplification plus Infinity Edge plus 3-star Gangplank plus Twin Shot.
Much.
Yeah, sounds reasonable. Well, despite that, looks like the amount of stability that this Urgot was able to bring to at least bring units within range of execution for Gangplank, so that way he can get some gold. Everything's starting to come together, so all of a sudden, Mercenary becomes a little bit kind of like Yordle, just a little extra gold at the end of each round, and Dasik has found some possibility for turning his game around. Can't say the same for Solo Gasang, who's jumped ahead of him in terms of 8th place. We have a couple players who are also close to Dasik in terms of HP. But Soju, who has lost his streak, and he was at level 7 at 3-1, pushing the issue, as both GV and Soju are at the top of HP. Let's see how this carousel can turn things around, though.
Yeah, for sure. And I have to call out Beth Sato has the augment that makes his little legend faster, which is always hilarious to see, but also gives him 2 HP per round, 2 little legend HP. So he can stall out the game a little longer. He's at 56 health, and so we can actually pay attention and watch that health come back. It can be really good if you need just a few extra turns to reach that endgame board state you're looking for. It doesn't provide any combat power in the late game, but again, it allows you to play just a little bit greedier than you might beforehand, maybe buy a few extra turns before you do your big level 8 roll down, and so we'll see if that pays off for Sato, and he can get some of those big late game comps like we were talking about.
Very much so. We're checking with Brazil's Tex, a player who put on some quite interesting performances yesterday, like playing very razor's edge, high risk, high reward situations, but ends up being able to survive just barely at the very last game with some really nice maneuvering. Ends up using a Twitch to carry these items with blue buff, Infinity Edge, and rapid fire cannon. What do you make of this early Twitch item hold? What do you think is in Tex's mind when he's setting up this kind of itemization?
I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure. I look at that blue buff and that Infinity Edge, and I see something like an Akali could be really good, or even a Lux if you want to go blue buff, i.e. Jeweled Gauntlet. The RFC, though, that's an item that I've personally been having struggles finding who's the right person to use that on. I haven't found many good RFC users short of Yone, but Yone not particularly going to use the blue buff, so I wonder if this is just Tex playing sort of strongest board, jamming his items that he has. But what breaks that theory to me is that he's got 3 items sitting on the bench. So I'm really not sure, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting because he also has a Chemtech emblem as well, which looks like he picked up through an augment. And, you know, these items back in the day were what people used to try and build on Akali when she was just a ninja assassin. So you could be onto something here, and maybe Tex can show us, hey, some new tech that people are using and as a way to get to Akali, who has been buffed repeatedly, and yet people are not sure exactly how to make her work. So maybe Tex can show us how that's going to be the case. Difficult to go up against Soju, though, who, again, trying to stay below 10 gold interest so that way he doesn't lose out on the hyper roll bonus, and does seem to have some benefit through scrap, and is going to continue to push his tempo while staying at low gold interest, capitalizing on that augment. GV8's also streaking as well, while on the other end you're talking about Sato. Can he turn things around? It's going to be a little bit difficult. Speaking of turn things around, we need to find a way for Sogo-san to stay competitive in this lobby, because he does snap his losing streak. He is going for a little bit of a roll here, just seeing what he can develop during the PBE round, so he has a lot more time to think about how to assemble his team.
Yeah, for sure. Thinking about it a bit, by the way, the RFC, I think, was from the item grab bag. It's because he had that Reforger there, so I think he was trying to figure that out. But yeah, so here we are on this board, and like I said, I think this is the pivotal point in the game right now, because right now, so far, at least on the PBE and on the tournaments, it seems like that late game board power is where these games are getting decided. And so you can see, is he going for that Fiora? Is he going for the Urgot? You know, he's got the Jhin there. It's time to roll down, see how many, you know, Oriannas and Jannas you can find. And so here we're going to see that shift, and it looks like Fiora is where he wants to go. You see that Fiora Yone pair that we've seen quite a bit with the 2 clockwork. I expect the Janna to go in here. Gives you that enchanter power. So this is kind of what we're talking about with that, one of those few stable late game boards. The question is, will the 1-star versions really be able to hold it off? And honestly, with these items, the power has kind of been, it's been really good. So he might actually be able to stabilize from here. Because again, the unitemized Janna and the Orianna are providing a lot of utility in CC, which allow those 2 time to just unload the damage. And you can see there, Fiora doing a lot of damage, healing up at the Hodge. There's the big ult, and comes away looking pretty strong here.
Yep, good turnaround here for Sologo-san. You can see the power of utilizing time as a resource and respecting it. Sologo-san says, I'm not going to try to do everything on 4-1 at the beginning of this stage, and as a result, cause myself to get dizzy and mess up the transition. And so long as Sogo-san over 2 rounds is able to put together a very good team and start turning around his game potentially here, finding a way to potentially also squeeze in Seraphine, get some additional socialite buff, recognizing that doesn't have Scholar in, and instead actually ditched the possibility of it by selling that Lissandra, I believe. Now can actually get a little bit of mana generation through the 2nd buff of socialite in that spotlight. Let's go ahead and check in with lobby leader K3 Soju, who's been very powerful, having 6 Chemtech, 3 Innovator, very good synergies across the board, not to mention that he's been pushing the issue at level 8 already, and if he's able to start putting together a streak, might be even able to consider going to 9 very quickly as well. This is one of the big debates about hyper rolls. Do you even continue to go push levels, or do you just roll at 8 indefinitely until you can pressure the lobby? And I'm curious to see how it performs in a tournament environment.
Yeah, for sure. And props to Soju here, because I think, like I said, this is where it could fall off. But he's using Chemtech plus Innovator plus Scrap to really just have so much effective health and be so far ahead of the leveling curve that no one else is really able to keep up. And even utilizing that Heimerdinger, who is generally a little bit one of the weaker on the damage side, to kind of stabilize, because again, there's just so much effective health, and the extra items, the extra power here. And so it does look like he's going to stay and try to hit some of these 2-cost 4-stars, whether it be Jhin, it could also be Urgot here. Doesn't really have the items, though, and so what worries me a little bit is this might be like a 3rd-place game as opposed to a 1st-place game.
Yeah, we'll see. We only have 5 games today, so we have to really make the best of every single opportunity that you get. But yeah, no, I think you've made some really good observations, and I really like that Soju, with the Scrap emblem pickup, is putting a belt onto Zac, and Zac, as we know, the Chemtech benefits off of it. Last round he got a Warmogs, this round he got a Zephyr, able to disable a little bit of that front line, capitalizing on the socialite as Hex and Solo Song did lose a little bit of time. Now, Soju doesn't have that much DPS initially, but the longer the fight goes, the more that this Heimerdinger is able to send wave after wave, and that is a 2-star Heimerdinger that's cleaning up everything. Fiora heals up with the Hand of Justice, able to clean up everything from the front line, and Soju's streak has been snapped. So Logan saying, able to turn things around, and now he is the one that's on a win streak.
Yeah, and this is kind of what I was talking about, right? Like, that's a 1-star Fiora with those items, and right now the power of some of those late game carries is so high comparatively that if you're still stuck on like your Ezreal or your Heimerdinger, this is where you're going to fall off, at least from what we've seen on the PBE so far. So he's got to hopefully hit one of these carries like this Jhin or this Urgot that he can transition the items to. But again, I look at that Jeweled Gauntlet and that Hodge, and I'm a little worried, you know, that this isn't like the right Jhin items. Maybe gets lucky and hits this Orianna. Those could be really good Orianna items. Orianna, actually an underrated carry that people have kind of started to figure out just how good she is with all that utility in CC. So hopefully he can hit one of these pairs, because he's got 3 pairs right now. Good news is he's getting a lot of gold every turn to roll down, because again, as long as he stays below 10 gold, he gets an extra 3 gold on top of that.
That's right. Yeah, he does have an excess of frontline items. Oh, it's a Dr. Mundo 2-star if he really wants to. He just has to sell a unit to buy it, and they can start putting Dr. Mundo closer to the front line to solo tank with that Stoneplate Gargoyle. So I think that it's really interesting Soju's setup, because as you were mentioning, his carry right now with Heimerdinger and the Rocket Swarm is okay, but it's falling off already here in the middle of stage 4, and will continue to be a lot weaker as people get their carries online at 2-star. Dr. Mundo gets Zephyr, so that's a big portion of his front line. So Cheetu with excellent outmaneuvering there. And so Soju might end up losing a ton of his defenses, and now Yone is onto the back line. The Rocket Swarms for Heimerdinger need a little bit more time to get online until the big crowd control pulls him off. And just enough CC, just enough tankiness from Soju brings balance to his comp, and Rocket Swarm is now fully online, dealing big damage to Cheetu. An excellent fight here for K3 Soju as we go to the 4-6 pivotal third augment.
Yeah, for sure. Hitting that Mundo, for example, gave him a lot of power. Here we see another tier 2 augment, whether it be Challenger, Academy, or Nice Edge, which gives your front row 50 attack damage. And since he's running Imperial right now with that Samira, if he's willing to put that Samira into the second row, that could be powerful. The challenge for him is going to be that he also has Exile now, and so for him to take that means he might have to give up some of that Exile buff. So instead, chooses to go with a very safe Challenger emblem. I'm not sure I like this choice here. It does give him a Challenger Jace, which is very powerful, but Samira, who's currently holding all of his items, not actually that great of a challenger. Her cast animation takes a long time. That being said, if he hits the Jace 2, moves these items over to the Jace, Jace in particular has ridiculous AD scaling, and I think people have figured out that melee Jace especially can do a lot of damage. So we could see something like a challenger, i.e. Last Whisper, melee Jace just trucking through here. I would love to see something like that.
Animal is choosing to put Jace into the back line as a transformer. Will prioritize using his range and his gate to accelerate the attack speed, and seeing if he can get the ability to combo off all of this damage where Basato has a 2-star Urgot with Deathblade Runins and Giant Slayer, and that's some good damage to be able to crank out quickly, as he does end up crushing through the back line of Torok. Now Sato is down to 8 HP. Tex not too far behind. Cheetu also at 13 life. And at the end of stage 4, we do have every player alive, but for everybody that's not Grand Vice and above, it is very scary to find out whether or not you can make top 4. Top 4 is doable for everybody in this lobby, but also bot 4 is very much on the table for Slogan down.
So I have to call out, by the way, we talked about how Sato had that augment that gave him 2 health per round. You notice he's right back up to 10. Had he not taken that, I'm not sure he'd still be alive right now. And so, again, kind of shows the power of that augment if you're stuck in a weaker position, how it can keep you alive longer. And now Sato has that 2-star Urgot with very powerful items, and hopefully that can keep him alive. And now you can see Sato back up to 12. Like, he can use that augment to turn this around and even start moving up the ladder on ratings. That's why it's a very unique augment.
Totally. Be it the ability to heal your little legend. Don't underestimate that whatsoever. Cheetu, it's 2-star Fiora, again with these Titans Resolves and the Giant Slayer, you know, pretty decent, but it's just raising the base stats. Going to do a lot less than Fioras that have crit items and able to get that big power boost. So we'll see how Chi-Tu chooses to go about this. Does have also a Banshees to protect against potential CC disruption in the very beginning. So utility-wise, Chi-Tu is very flexible and open, but he does lack a lot of the cap that some other people are able to do. The Final Spark actually not able to do that much, and I think the quality of Chi-Tu's board very much outmatches Grand Vice's board, and GV8, who started off with a lot of HP, is now starting to have that HP lead chunked away.
Yeah, and we can see from Chi-Tu's board here, and this is what we're talking about, again, that Fiora-Yone pair, and he's got the Janna and the Orianna, and even on the other side, we saw the Orianna, the Seraphine, and this is kind of what we're seeing right now in the PBE meta. It's get yourself a strong 4 or 5 cost carry, get a little bit of frontline, and then jam these really strong utility champions. Seraphine, Taric, that gives you the Socialite. Orianna, that gives you the Clockwork, the powerful shield, the Disruption. Janna for the Disruption and the heal. This has certainly been kind of what I've expected to see. And so now it's a matter of, again, who gets the strongest version of that?
Well, the strongest version of Chi-Tu's board, he believes, is going to be by placing the Galio and swapping out 2 of his units. That's a trade-off with Colossus. Get less board space. Going to crush through the front line here, or actually dodge the front line. Just leave it up to the Fiora to be able to navigate around that Galio. And now it's just down to Jace and Galio for Tex's side. Tex bites the dust here. Chi-Tu eliminates another player. And just like that, 2 players are gone after 2 rounds. Let's hop on board with GV8, who's trying to make the Lux work. The Socialite Hex is in a little bit of an awkward spot because you don't really want to place Lux right there close to the front center. Instead, going to utilize that onto the Vex and see whether or not GV8 can stabilize here. He had an HP lead, but it's not really working out and resulting him to land into the top 2. GV8 might be on the outside of the top 4 in this game, trying to use a Rage Blade onto Victor and hope that he was able to hit Victor too. He has whiffed. And see if it's enough to survive here. This is a fight potentially for top 4.
Yeah, this is unfortunate because Vex 2 isn't really a strong enough champion in the late game unless you have a lot of Arcanist and Enchanter or get that 3-star. And unfortunately, he's only at 3 Arcanist, which means he doesn't have that extra 40%. And as you see there, it just doesn't hold. That combined with being Zephyr, that certainly isn't going to allow it to hold. And so just doesn't get through, and we can see him kind of fall over. And yeah, this might be a 6th place, unfortunately, for GV8.
Does end up surviving. Chi-Tu's out in 6th. So he could have the ability to, I mean, he does have 5th guaranteed. If he gets a good matchup to something that he's looking for, he might even have an opportunity to get into the top 4 if Sologason takes a loss. And then GV8's able to survive. So he takes a Shroud. This is immediate play for late game power here. But I agree. I think nothing in this composition looks particularly powerful. Even the Lux items themselves are a little bit more utility focused, right? With the Hextech Gunblade as opposed to saying more top end power. He's not deep into Arcanist. He's not deep into Academy. Doesn't even really have the big Scholar for the mana buff. And so at this point for Grand Vice, what can you really do to try and manipulate your odds to be even more powerful and cap out here?
Yeah, this is actually the play I was hoping for, is that he would get in that 4 Arcanist, possibly consider taking out that Jace, because the 4 Arcanist is going to give that Vex the extra 40% AP. It'll allow the shield to at least be a little bit longer. So hopefully that can help. Giz going to use the Shroud here to at least buy himself 1 more round, and maybe that'll be enough. But as you mentioned, this Lux, unfortunately, just is not cutting it compared to that Urgot right now. Urgot just chunking it, and I think that's going to be the end of GV8.
Yeah, good effort here, but Lux seems consistently to be a little bit too hard to get set up compared to some of the AD comps right now. So if you do set her up, you have to really make sure that she hits very, very hard, and it's like a snowball effect with her final spark. So understandable 5th place, but you know, a little bit disappointing on his end because I'm sure that he felt like he could have been able to squeeze out top 4, and the HP is so close that it does feel like it's anybody's game here to squeeze into the top 2. Dasik is streaking. Soju's lead is at 65 HP, so it feels like he's guaranteed top 3 or better. We'll see whether or not Dasik can be able to play for first here.
Yeah, I really like this board Dasik's put together here. He's got the 6 Bruiser, giving his team a lot of health. He's got the Chemtech. He's got a very powerful itemized Urgot. This feels like one of the few variations of the endgame state that don't involve Janna and Orianna. that can actually do pretty well here because the Chem Tech provides that extra healing that you're looking for. And sure enough, kind of just obliterates his opponent here.
Yeah, very easy win for Dasic, as his Urgot's able to crush through with just a traditional bruiser front line. Now Soju takes damage from Solo, so Torque is out in fourth. Solo is now streaking as well, and all of a sudden, if Soju finds himself ping-ponging back and forth between these two players, I don't know if it's top 2 guaranteed for Soju here.
Certainly, he's got good odds. I mean, the fact that you mentioned is he's got 50 health. Eventually, you assume Dasic and Solo Gosang will fight each other. It becomes a question of which of the two beat each other. I do think Dasic has a very powerful front line. I like this Zac itemization. If he can hit that Zac 3 especially, that'll be very powerful. And again, this Urgot is just unloading the damage. Has the 2 twin shot, has the Chem Tech, has great items here. So whereas we look at this board, and we have a Jhin with, frankly, suboptimal items. And this is what we were talking about. He can probably hit level 9 here pretty handily. But these Jhin items, I don't think are going to cut it. And so right now, I think Dasic especially looking much stronger than Soju is right now.
Yeah, and if he's going to focus on crits, perhaps use a caster carry like Kaisa, maybe even the Fabled Akali can make her appearance here. With Jhin right now, yes, he does have the clockwork, but outside of that, not really that important in terms of his synergy, so he does have flexibility in terms of who his carry could be with these items. Going up against Dasic's board, who we know is very, very powerful, kind of crushing through with that Chemtech board, does not have Zac 3. Urgot's front line is a little bit more weak right now. No one's getting backline access outside of this Jinx 1 with a Bramble Veg trying to put out damage. Look at how much that 1-star Jinx is doing with minimal items, and now that Urgot's fully online, the Purge using the Runa's Hurricane, able to get some big damage out. Soju trying to stabilize how much health he's going to lose. These guys are actually still pretty close, so even though Soju does end up dropping here in this fight, that wasn't a bad loss whatsoever, so it looks like he's able to at least preserve some HP.
Yeah, I think, Soju showing that despite the nerfs, Mundo's still an insanely powerful tank, especially with that Gargoyle Stoneplate. And honestly, the big saving grace for Dasic there was the Hurricane. Had the Hurricane not been there, I think the Jhin goes untouched, everyone gets stuck on the Mundo, and Soju wins that game. But thanks to Hurricane, and that's why that item, despite not proccing on hits anymore, is still very powerful because it allows you to skip that front line. And here we go. If he switches this, I'd love to see even the Jhin items switch to the Jace here. This Jace is very powerful and I think much more universally powerful than the Jhin right now.
Yeah, it's still good to just have it, and I think right now he doesn't want to rush this transition because you can see him kind of thinking really hard as he goes up against Solo Gosang's board. Solo trying to survive. That Fiora is cutting through. Needs a little bit more time to get online. The Blade Waltz has now found her way to the back line, and Jhin is not going to be able to eliminate the Fiora in time. All of a sudden, more cracks are showing through Soju's composition. Dasic ends up being the Ghost. And as a result, Soju is still kind of racking his brain to figure out how he wants to win this log. It looks like, again, as you were mentioning, Dasic should play solo, but it's not guaranteed that Soju will be able to get to this top 2 based on his current trajectory. Can he find a way to improve it? Looks like he's trying to find a way to move his items, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, and like you said, this is where you hope that Dasic faces solo. You're actually a Dasic fan if you're a Soju fan right now, because you want Dasic to knock out solo to buy as much time as possible for Soju, because worst case scenario is that Solo and Dasic fight, Solo wins, Dasic, survives with about 6 health, and then Soju's still kind of the weakest board. But with these items on the Jace, I do think it's a bit stronger, though right now I think I favor the melee Jace as opposed to the range Jace. The melee Jace giving himself that self-shield, but we'll have to see here, and thankfully it looks like the Jace is going to do the job here and give Soju the win.
Oh, and Dasic gets the win over Solo, so now it's just Dasic versus Soju with very close HP. What should be the final carousel of this game. Soju's beelining for that Zephyr, and Dasic is not able to get it, but he does pick up the second Bramble Vest to reinforce his front line, prevent his bruisers from getting crit very quickly. And now Soju has just this Jace. Does he want to place him in the front line? I think maybe he feels like his front line's good enough. He already has all these units in the front, and it's going to be crowding Jace and maybe not being very efficient, so he feels like backline is what he needs. And I mean, his backline is kind of suspect at this point. He's playing a 2-star Singe for synergies at the Innovator in Chemtech, and he's playing a 1-star Zillion as well to tie everything together. I wonder if this is good enough for Soju to get top 1.
I actually think it is. In particular, what I really like here is the 3 Innovator. It's kind of underestimated, but that spell gives extra DR to one of your tanks. And so if that casts on like the Mundo, for example, that can provide just even more tankiness here. And this Jace, while not quite as good as the melee version, still does a lot of damage. And you can see how much it's critting for here. And so despite how good of items Dasik has here, he just can't get through that front line. And, and you can see it's close, but this is just enough. And, you know, look at that damage meter. It's actually Mundo in second place with the, like, 5,000 magic damage.
True.
So I think this is going to work. And it's going to be up to Dasik if he can reposition. But that Mundo right now is really hurting him, and without any Last Whisper. I wonder if Dasik, this would be an opportunity to try to get a Victor in there to get that armor penetration. Victor, yep, and you can see it there. You saw it. He puts in the Victor, hopefully get the armor penetration, and that's some of the utility that Victor can provide, even if he's not a caster, to this Chemtech comp. So hopefully this can make a difference for Dasik.
The Zephyr is going to be targeted at the Victor immediately. So he says, I'm not going to chase the Zac. I'm going to try to prioritize the utility unit and now try to keep his Jace as safe as possible. What could be the last fight here as Zac, it does get disrupted. The big Oriana Shockwave rearranging the front line, and now Urgot has no defenses. K3 Soju is coming for yet another first place to start off today here for the top 8 of the PBE Clash, as North America will get the first laugh of championships.
Soju won the first game. Thanks for watching.